In 1977, a struggling comic book company handed away the future of cinema for pocket change. Marvel was broke, desperate. They needed cash to survive. So they did what any drowning company does. They started selling off the one thing that would one day be worth everything. Spider-Man, Iron Man, Thor, licensed out to studios like New Line Cinema for fees so low they barely covered the legal bills. No back-end deals, no creative control, no share of the merchandise. Just a check, a handshake, and a prayer that maybe this superhero thing would work out. It worked out. To the tune of $30 billion in box office revenue, most of which Marvel never touched. When Disney bought Marvel in 2009 for $4 billion, they were buying the scraps. The crown jewels had already been sold. A company that owned the most beloved characters in pop culture history had structured their survival deals so badly that they were essentially licensing their own legacy to competitors. If you want to understand how a property worth billions can be legally carved up and handed to strangers, you need to look at what happened a year before Marvel was even born as a public company. Because in 1976, George Lucas walked into a negotiation with 20th Century Fox, and he asked for something so unusual that the studio laughed. Lucas wanted a lower directing fee. In exchange, he wanted the merchandising rights to Star Wars. Fox said yes. They thought toys were worthless. They thought a movie about space wizards and laser swords wasn't exactly a licensing goldmine. By 1978, Star Wars merchandise had generated $100 million. By the time the original trilogy ended, that number crossed $1 billion. Fox watched billions in revenue flow directly to Lucas. Money they'd given away in a negotiation they didn't even bother to take seriously. Lucas built an empire, literally funded Industrial Light and Magic, built Skywalker Ranch, all from toys Fox decided weren't worth negotiating over. One bad clause in a contract, that's all it takes. But what happens when you don't just give away rights? What happens when you actively build your competitor's foundation and hand them the keys to your industry? In the year 2000, Yahoo was the most visited website on Earth. They had the traffic, they had the brand, they had everything except one thing, a better search advertising system. So they made a deal. They outsourced their search ads to a small company called Google. Let that sit for a second. Yahoo handed Google access to their users, their ad inventory, and their traffic. And in return, they got a revenue split that felt reasonable in 2000 and catastrophic by 2002. Google used Yahoo's own platform to scale, to optimize, to perfect the advertising engine that would eventually make them the most valuable media company in history. Yahoo's deal didn't just fail to help Yahoo. It actively subsidized their replacement. By 2008, Google controlled 63% of the US search market. Yahoo had 20%. The company that had once been synonymous with the internet had been slowly hollowed out by a partner they'd chosen, funded, and trusted. That's not bad luck. That's a strategy meeting that nobody stress tested. And yet somehow, Napster managed to make Yahoo look like tactical geniuses. In 1999, 80 million people were using Napster. 80 million. At a time when Facebook didn't exist, when YouTube was still 6 years away, Napster had built the first mass-market music streaming platform in history. The technology worked. The demand was undeniable. The cultural moment was perfect. And instead of calling Warner Music and saying, let's structure a deal, Napster went to war. They fought the labels. They fought Metallica. They fought the RIAA. They burned every bridge available to them while sitting on what could have been Spotify, a decade before Spotify existed. In 2001, a federal court shut them down. The assets were sold for $2.43 million. $2 million. For the platform that had already proven the entire streaming model worked. Spotify launched in 2006. It's now worth $60 billion. Napster just needed to make one phone call they were too proud to make. But pride isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like a boardroom full of suits who think they've solved retail. Blockbuster in the mid-1990s made a decision that felt smart at the time. Instead of buying VHS tapes outright from studios, which cost them $60 to $70 per tape, they switched to revenue-sharing agreements. Studios got a cut of every rental. Blockbuster got cheaper inventory. Seemed like a win. What it actually did was shackle them to the studios. Margins thinned. Dependency deepened. And while Blockbuster was renegotiating supplier agreements, Netflix was mailing DVDs and quietly building something Blockbuster's contracts made impossible to copy fast enough. In 2000, Blockbuster had the chance to buy Netflix for $50 million. They passed. In 2010, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy. Netflix is now worth $280 billion. The supplier deal didn't kill Blockbuster alone, but it weakened them at exactly the wrong moment. Just like Sony weakened themselves in a completely different way when they bought Spider-Man's film rights in 1999. Wait, Sony didn't buy them. Marvel sold them for a number so embarrassingly small that Sony executives allegedly celebrated in the parking lot. The exact figure varies by account, but estimates place it around $7 million with back-end royalties for the most commercially valuable superhero character ever created. Spider-Man. No Way Home, and made $1.9 billion at the box office. From a single film, Marvel sold Spider-Man because they were in financial distress. Sony bought because they were opportunistic. The deal made sense in 1999. By 2021, it looked like the greatest IP acquisition bargain in Hollywood history. Now imagine if Marvel's mistake was Sony's entire business model. That's Quibi. In 2020, Quibi raised $1.75 billion, one of the largest media launches in history. They hired Jeffrey Katzenberg, they hired Meg Whitman, they signed A-list creators, Hollywood studios, premium content deals worth hundreds of millions. The pitch was elegant. Short-form, mobile-first premium video. 6 minutes or less. For commuters, for lunch breaks, for the gaps in modern life. The contracts they signed were ironclad and expensive. High upfront costs, limited content ownership, no flexibility to pivot or repackage. When COVID hit and nobody was commuting, Quibi had no way to move the content to TV screens, no way to redistribute, no way to adjust. They were locked in. 6 months after launch, they shut down. $1.75 billion. Gone. The content deals that were supposed to signal prestige became a cage they couldn't escape. Sometimes the structure of a deal is the trap. Daimler-Benz learned that in 1998 when they announced a merger of equals with Chrysler, equal partnership, shared leadership, a transatlantic automotive powerhouse. The press called it the deal of the century. It was not a merger of equals. It was an acquisition dressed up as a romance. Daimler executives ran the show. Cultural integration failed spectacularly. German engineering culture and American manufacturing culture collided daily. Chrysler's liabilities were worse than disclosed. By 2007, Daimler paid Cerberus Capital $650 million just to take Chrysler off their hands. Now, they paid someone to take the company they'd bought for $36 billion. The merger of equals framing wasn't just PR spin. It prevented the kind of hard integration decisions that might have actually saved value. When you negotiate the story instead of the structure, you pay for it later. And then there's AT&T, who thought paying billions for iPhone exclusivity in 2007 was a steal. In one sense, it was. AT&T got the iPhone first. Subscriptions exploded. Revenue surged. But the terms Apple demanded were unprecedented. A revenue share on every monthly bill, restrictions on customization, and a deal structure that handed Apple leverage no carrier had ever given a device manufacturer. While AT&T celebrated, Verizon, T-Mobile, and international carriers watched Apple use AT&T's own exclusivity period to perfect the iPhone, build the App Store, and establish terms that would govern every future carrier negotiation. AT&T's exclusive was real. The leverage it was supposed to buy was an illusion. Every single one of these deals had a moment. One meeting, one clause, one conversation, where the outcome could have changed. Marvel needed one lawyer who understood long-term IP value. Yahoo needed one executive who asked, what happens if Google gets too good? Napster needed one person willing to pick up the phone instead of hiring attorneys. The pattern isn't stupidity. These were smart people in real companies with real advisors. The pattern is certainty. Every one of them was certain they understood what the future looked like. None of them did.